Did you know that you only need to learn 550 words to become conversationally fluent in English or any other language? This applies to Spanish or Farsi or Japanese. You see, all languages at their core are the same. In fact, all languages have three main ingredients: words or vocabulary, rules or grammar, and sounds or pronunciation. That's it. There are three main parts to any language. In this video, I'm going to focus on vocabulary, which is arguably the hardest part of the language, and I'll talk to you about the most efficient way to learn it. So make sure you stick around right to the end of this video, because this video could enable you to learn 94% of a language in just a few months, or possibly even just a few weeks. Okay, let's begin by discussing how many words you need to learn. Native English speakers know about 20,000 words, and it's the same for native speakers of any other language too. 20,000 is a lot of words. When you think of learning 20,000 anything, your brain explodes. And what's worse is when I say word, I'm only counting the root words, not all the other associated words. So the word friend, for example, has lots of associated words, including friendship, friendly, friendliest, friends, friendless. All of these words are counted as one word. So a native English speaker knows 20,000 of these single root words alone. But how many words do you need to know to become fluent in another language, such as English? Here's the best news you've heard all week. You don't need to learn 20,000 words to become fluent. You only need to learn 700. And as I'll explain a little later, actually only 550. That's right. If you're smart, you can save yourself a lot of time and effort by concentrating on high-frequency words. These 700 keywords are called high-frequency words. You see, although there are actually 600,000 words in English, we only use a tiny percentage of them in day-to-day speech. Here's the equation which will blow your mind. 700 keywords equals 94% of day-to-day spoken use. So, while there might be 600,000 words in English, of which a native speaker knows about 20,000, you only need to know 700 to understand almost 10 out of 10 words used in daily speech. And as I mentioned, it's not actually 700, it's 550. Because I need to explain something really important to you. Meaning words versus grammar words. If we look at the most common 700 words in English, and this applies to all languages, you'll notice that the most common words, the words we use in almost every sentence all the time, are actually grammatical words. In fact, the top 20 most common words in English are all grammar words. Be, the, and, to, of, you, it, in, have, that, we, not, they, do, he, this, for, on, but. You see, there are actually two types of words in English. There are grammar words, like we've just seen, and there are meaningful words. Let me explain a bit more. Grammatical words include articles like a, an, and the, auxiliary verbs like is or was or do or have, prepositions like of or in or for, and pronouns like he or her or it. Notice how these grammatical words don't have any or very little meaning. When I say one of these words to you, you can't see anything with your mind. And that's because these words are kind of like a glue of language. They help stick the language together. Then we have the meaningful words, or the bricks. Meaning words include nouns like person, time, question, verbs like think, say, or want, and adjectives like long, old, or high. Nouns, verbs, and adjectives are meaningful. When I say these words, they form a picture in your mind. You can see them. They have meaning. So the good news is you don't have to memorize any grammar words. You learn those through practice and exposure. You only have to memorize or learn the meaningful words. And because there are 150 high-frequency grammar words in English, that means of the 700 words, you only need to memorize 550 in order to understand 94% of spoken English. 550 words. You can do this, and in the description below is a link to download these 550 most commonly used nouns, verbs, and adjectives. It's an Excel spreadsheet that you can use for English or any other language. But to use this super powerful word list, you need to be able to do one important thing. Identify nouns, verbs, and adjectives. As I mentioned, you only need to memorize nouns, verbs, and adjectives. These are by far the most important words to learn, but you need to be able to identify these words when you see them in front of you. For example, if you look at this sentence here, can you identify the nouns, verbs, and adjectives? The small child sat next to his young mother. Well, the nouns, the things, are child and mother. The verb is sat, which comes from the verb sit. And the adjectives are small and young. The other words, the, next to, and his, are grammar words. If you need help identifying nouns, verbs, and adjectives, then check out our free grammar course. Click the link in the description below. It's super important that you have this skill. It will make learning another language, like English, much simpler. Now that we know what words we need to learn, let's find out how to memorize them. How many times do I need to see or hear a word before I remember it? Let's unpack this a little bit. The first issue I want to talk about is understanding versus using. It's one thing to understand a word when you hear or see it, but it's another thing to be able to use a word when speaking or writing. In fact, it's much easier to understand a word than it is to be able to use it. Science tells us that we need to see or hear a word around 12 times before we can memorize it. And if we want to be able to use the word in speaking or writing, we need to come across the word up to 80 times. I'm sure you know that you can't just see a word once or twice and then understand it and use it for the rest of your life. You need to see, hear, say, and write the word lots of times before it sticks in your brain. Or do you? Surely there's a way to make learning vocabulary much, much faster. There is. Memorizing words fast. The reason why it takes 12 to 80 times before you memorize a word is because you're meeting the words by chance. Perhaps you hear a word on YouTube or see a word in an advertisement on the street. You're not purposely memorizing keywords. You can, however, burn these words into your brain much more quickly by learning them on purpose. And the way that you do that is by using flashcards. Personally, I don't recommend using a flashcard app on your phone. I don't think they work. They certainly don't work for me. What works for me is actually writing the words down onto pieces of paper, but there are certain ways to organize your flashcards. Categorize your flashcards by nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Don't memorize grammatical words and don't mix up your word types. Have a stack of nouns, a stack of verbs, and a stack of adjectives. Having the words separated like this will help you to memorize them much more easily. Write the English word on one side, or whatever language you're studying, and then write the translation in your native language on the other. So remember I told you it's easier to understand or to comprehend a new word while listening or reading rather than to use a new word while speaking or writing. Well, when you start to use your flashcards, you want to start by understanding the new words first. This means that you go from the target language, such as English, think of the translation, and then flip the card to check it in your native language to see if you've got it right. Here we're training our listening and reading skills, or our receptive skills. And once you're comfortable with this, and I'll teach you a trick in a minute to help memorize words much more easily, you then need to work through the flashcards in the opposite way, starting with the word in your native language, thinking of the English word, and then checking you got it right. This way, you're training your speaking and writing skills. You'll probably notice how trying to think of the target word is much harder than just understanding it. You need to move through the flashcards in both directions. Just as an aside, I like to use different colored pens when I write my words. I write my nouns in blue, my verbs in red, and my adjectives in green. Use a memory aid or mnemonic. Okay, let's say you want to learn a new word. Do you just look at it, say, a few times and then move on? No, because that's not how our minds work. Our minds are very good at forgetting information and terrible at remembering information. So what we need to do is make an association between the new word in the target language and an existing word that you already know in your first language. Imagine you're learning the noun Karuble. This isn't a real word, but just bear with me. We've identified it as a noun, and let's imagine it means opportunity. So the new word, Karuble, means opportunity in my first language. What I need to do now is make a connection, some sort of connection, any sort of connection between this new word, this new sound, and a word that I already know that reminds me of the word Karuble and the meaning opportunity in my first language. So I know that ruble is the currency or money used in Russia. And car, well, that just reminds me of the word car in English. So I imagine that I have a great opportunity to buy a new car in rubles. I've just given my mind something to hold on to. I've used two words I know, ruble and car, to remember to memorize Karuble as opportunity. If I do this well, I don't need to meet the word 12 or 80 times. I usually only have to do it once or twice, and then I can remember the new word. And importantly, I can remember it in both directions. So if I hear or see the word Karuble, I think, that means opportunity. And if I want to use the word opportunity, I think, that word is Karuble. Sometimes, admittedly, it's difficult to think of an association. But what's weird is that the more abstract the association, the easier it is to memorize. You need to do this with all 550 words. And I recommend doing 10 or 20 or even 50 words at a time. It's possible, and trust me, it works. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Getting organized. To be honest, one of the most challenging things about learning a language and learning these 550 words is getting organized. You need a high-frequency word list organized by nouns, verbs, and adjectives, flashcards, and 3 colored pens. Remember, you can download the 550 words from the description below. These words are based on the work of 2 excellent linguists called Charles Brown and Brent Culligan, and I've put a link to their website in the description below as well. The word list is an Excel spreadsheet that has 4 columns. The target word, an area for you to identify whether it's a noun, verb, or adjective, translation into your native language, and your memory aid. Of course, you can use this list for any other language as well. You'll just need to make sure you get a good translation of each word. Okay, there's one more important piece of the puzzle here. Applying the words to social situations, or practicing. It's a major step towards fluency by memorizing these 550 words. And if you memorize 50 at a time, which is entirely possible, you may only need to study 11 times to remember them all. But then you need to start using them. You need to apply them. If you're learning English, This is where you go to E2 English and start putting them into use with fun listening, speaking, writing, and reading activities. Recap. So I've just shown you how to rapidly learn a language. 550 of those words, as well as the grammatical words, will result in you knowing 94% of the spoken language. We understood how many words you need to learn, what high frequency words are, what the difference between meaning words and grammar words are, why it's important to be able to identify nouns, verbs, and adjectives, how many times you need to meet a word before you remember it, how you can memorize words fast, how you can organize your vocabulary learning, and the importance of application and consistency. So that's the fastest way to become fluent in conversational English or another language that you're learning. My name is Jay. Remember to practice, and I'll see you soon.